We are at a moment in history right now where new opportunities are possible, even as we continue to trudge through this extreme division that our country is facing. Reconstruction. It's the start of something new. It's a new opportunity to begin again. Reconstruction was a period of significant importance in history, where people asked questions about our country that we're still debating today. Issues like labor, what freedom meant, and the questions of citizenship were all being debated by the public. The history of Reconstruction is usually presented with many falsehoods that have been altered to try and reignite the rise of the South after the Civil War. It was a moment in history that proposed new opportunities to challenge the existing systematic model that was shattered following the collapse of slavery. As historian Foner puts it, issues that agitate American politics today, access to citizenship, Voting Rights Act, the relative powers of national security and state government, the relationship between political and economic democracy, the proper response to terrorism, all of these were Reconstruction questions, but that era has long been misunderstood. One of the major issues debated in public following the Civil War was a reignited debate that took place between Thomas Jefferson and Alexander Hamilton. Jefferson believed that the U.S. could be an agrarian paradise where every man could enjoy the fruits of their own labor, with a strong state government and a small federal government. Hamilton, on the other hand, wanted a large federal government led by the wealthy and supported by the growth and expansion of manufacturing, business, and technology, while moving away from agrarian labor force. This was seen as a debate between rule by the wealthy and rule by the people. At the end of the Civil War, President Lincoln wanted the unification of the North and South to occur with ease, only demanding 10% of loyalty to the Constitution from each Confederate state to get back into the U.S. In 1865, the Freedmen's Bureau was created, which was made up of former slaves and refugees from the South who wanted to reconstruct a new society in the South. While Emancipation Proclamation and the 13th Amendment freed all slaves, they weren't really considered citizens and had little to any political voice in the barely 100-year-old democracy. Lincoln was assassinated a week after the victory of the Civil War, never being able to fulfill his own Reconstruction, and instead handed the reins over to Vice President Andrew Johnson. While no one will really know what Lincoln's policies following the Civil War would have been, we do know that he did speak of wanting some limited black suffrage for the, quote, very intelligent African Americans, as well as those who had served, a view that had grown over the years from his original call to sending all African Americans back to their homeland. A black abolitionist and a former slave commented on the new challenges that freedom offered and presented a forced experimentation by black and white, speculating what labor system would replace slavery. Was freedom enough, or would blacks be granted the equal right to vote? These were questions the radicals, abolitionists, and free slaves were beginning to wonder. What would society look like? What could society look like? Instead, Johnson, a racist states' rights activist, and many who saw a stubborn individual who would continuously fight within his own party, had little desire to enfranchise freed African Americans. He preferred that they return to work on their former plantations for pay while living out their lives without any role in politics. Johnson was more interested in unifying the South than reconstructing it. Johnson once declared, quote, "This is a country for white men, and by God, as long as I am president, it shall be a government for white men." While Johnson did plan to allow the Reconstruction policies to continue in the states that Lincoln had negotiated with before his death, he made all the southern states ratify the 13th Amendment, which declared the end of slavery except for punishment of crime. Johnson also offered leniency to Southerners, offering amnesty and pardons, restoring all of their property to most Southerners who took an oath to the Constitution to rejoin the Union. This dissolved General Sherman's famous 40 acres and a meal policy, which provided land to freed slaves for them to toil and work on, which was reconfiscated and given back to the former slave owners. Shortly after rejoining the country, many of the former Confederate leaders were able to once again participate in state politics, running government positions at the protest of radical Republicans. These leaders in the South created black codes that brought back slavery all but in name. Without means to their own land, African Americans were forced to work the lands of their former slave owners with pittance of pay. If they chose otherwise, they were arrested as vagrants and forced back into slavery, using the loophole in the 13th Amendment. Black codes were made up of several laws. Race was defined by blood. The presence of any amount of black blood made one black. Employment was required of all free men. Violators faced vagrancy charges. Freedmen could not assemble without the presence of a white person. Freedmen were assumed to be agricultural workers, and their duties and hours were tightly regulated. Freedmen were not to be taught to read or write. Public facilities were segregated, and violators of these laws were subject to being whipped or branded. In certain states, black codes were even more severe, stating, freedmen were denied the practiced religion without a permit from any president or policy jury. Freedmen were denied the freedom to rent or buy a house. Freedmen were prohibited from interracial marriages.